Hey family, welcome to We All Need Each Other, the podcast from Transformation Ministries.
Welcome everybody to the We All Need Each Other podcast. I'm really excited today because I've got two really good friends here with me. Well, three if I count Allie, but Allie's always with me. But Theo Williams and Adam Sharp are two really good friends of mine. They're also pastors in our area. And we invited them here to talk about what pastoring has been like over the last few years. We'll get into kind of the timeline of the last few years in a little bit. But for now, I would love for each of you guys to just introduce yourselves. Tell us whatever you want to tell us about yourselves, who you are, how old you are, what your role is, your family, all that. So Adam, why don't you start?
Yeah, absolutely. So my name is Adam Sharp. I have an amazing wife named Esther. Got 4 children, Samuel, Isabel, Rebecca, and Isaac, 10, 8, 5, and 1.5. So our world is crazy. We're in the middle of a hurricane right now of children. So it's wonderful. It's great. Right before we came over here, I was playing Millborn with my kids. And so it was a ton of fun. I've been at St. Mark for almost a little over 8 years now, going into my 9th year. Been a pastor since 2006. So it's been a little bit of time, and been a I did youth ministry for years and years and years, and that was my passion. And then God kind of uprooted me and sent me to Ohio for a few years and taught me some leadership lessons, and then came back here to the Mishawaka area and started putting those to use. And God continued to speak to me through student ministry and then associate work. And then God moved me into the senior role here at St. Mark Missionary Church over the last year, and loved a lot of it. I've learned a lot. There's been a lot going on in our world. And as a senior pastor of a larger church, I've learned a lot and learned to rely on him every step of the way. So it's a little bit about me.
That's good. Theo, why don't you introduce yourself?
Yes, my name is Theo Williams. Married to Nicole Williams. We just celebrated our 20th anniversary last week, so that's a blessing. I'm a professor, been a professor at Bethel University for the last 17 years. Got involved in ministry fresh out of college, so in 1998, 99, 2000. Helped plant a church in Lynn, Massachusetts. After that, attended seminary, and my wife and I, we did some missionary work in Jamaica for a while. Moved back to Indiana in 2006. That's when I started working at Bethel. Never had any desire, had a passion for ministry, but never had a desire to be a pastor. Although, family talked about me being a pastor even as a young boy. Ran from that responsibility, from that calling for a long time. Not that I didn't think I was cut out or whatever, I just flat out didn't want that type of responsibility. It's a weighty responsibility. Mm-hmm. I love caring for people, I love investing, but I didn't want necessarily the weight of shepherding the flock. Mm-hmm. But then in 2016, my best friend and I, Ryan Fleming, we were traveling around speaking at different churches about our story in terms of racial reconciliation. And the pastor at Covenant Community Church, where I'm the pastor at now, heard us speak, invited me to come speak at that church. My wife and I, we were in between ministries at the time. We fell in love with the church, and 2 years later, through a course of events, I found myself being the co-intern pastor, and then became the solo intern pastor a year later, and then became just the lead pastor with no intern tag in 2020. And so it's been a blessing. And so just looking forward to whatever God has next. That's a little bit about myself.
Yeah, thank you guys so much. So let's just jump right into the topic. We'll introduce it. I want to introduce it with a time. I'm going to run it through a timeline real quick. And this is just like the greatest hits timeline of the last 6 years, if you could call it that. So it doesn't cover everything, but it covers some of the big events. So just starting in 2016, the election of Donald Trump. And I want to just say, these are like culture shaping like momentous things that we all can look back on and remember, oh yeah, that was a big deal. So 2016, Donald Trump is elected. By 2019, he's being impeached. And then 2020 gets its own category in this timeline because we all know 2020 was just that crazy. So 2020 started off in January is when Kobe Bryant died. And that we thought that was bad. Like we thought this is the year is off to a really bad start. And that was true because in March, COVID-19 hits the US and shuts us down. April and May, we have the murders of Ahmaud Arbery, Breonna Taylor, George Floyd. And then by that summer, there's just protests, racial justice protests. There's protests about masks or no masks, shutdowns, reopen. Just a crazy summer of demonstrations and protests and just high intensity. And then that fall is when the next presidential election happened. And we had the battle over, is this a legitimate election or not? That just carried on into 2021. January 2021, we have the January 6th Capitol attack. And then we have the inauguration of Joe Biden and Kamala Harris in 2021. This year so far, the one big event that I made note of was that Roe v. Wade was overturned. And then throughout all of this time, we've got mass shootings, decreasing trust of the news media, changing US demographics, culture wars over things like critical race theory, abortion, LGBTQ and trans rights, and Christian nationalism. There's just every day, right? We're just flooded with all of these things. And you just hear it everywhere. We're more divided. Things are polarized. Just things are so intense. There's just hate-filled speech everywhere. So it's been an intense time. And I'm not saying anything you guys don't already know.
Exactly.
But I would love to know with you guys over those years. So even the last 6 years, you could even shorten it up to just since 2020 if you want to. Just a general question of what has it been like for you to lead a church during those years? This is just very general. We'll get into some more specific questions at some point, but let's start with that. What's it been like to lead in these times? And Theo, why don't you start us?
Yeah, great question. I think for me, it's been challenging in a lot of ways, but that's the call. I feel more like a pastor when I'm having to do things that are outside of my comfort zone, when I'm having to have tough conversations, having to console individuals. I think if you're talking specifically about the pandemic, there were three deaths, 3 funerals I had to do during the pandemic. And 2 of them, one we had where it was a husband and a father who died. At the service, it was just the wife, the daughter, and one other because of the pandemic. Another, there was our oldest church member died, and it was just a graveside memorial because of the pandemic. And the day of the actual funeral, like maybe like a day before the funeral, like maybe months into the pandemic, we thought it was safe enough to have a funeral indoors. And that the day before, the husband of the surviving daughter. So like one of our members, her mother passed away. The day before her funeral, her husband passed away. And this is all during the pandemic. And just talking to other friends who felt even more so robbed during that time in terms of not being able to spend their last days with their loved ones. I remember visiting the eldest member who passed away, and she was at home at the time, and her children were in town. And my wife and I went and visited, and we were outside speaking through the window. It was during the height of the pandemic. And both my wife and I said, no, go inside. I don't think I had a mask at the time. This is before they were even talking about masks. I just trusted the Lord, went in there, thought it was important, and she ended up passing away, I think, a few days later.
Wow.
And so those are things I remember most about that time. That along with what I call one of the worst summers ever in terms of Breonna Taylor, Marbury, George Floyd, and hitting that tipping point, even as someone who prides himself on having all the right words to say, consoling others. It was a tough year for me where I found myself really having to distance myself from certain individuals in order to not cuss people out. And I mean, it was a collective fatigue, a collective anger. And thankfully, one of the elders in our church who happened to be white, he was a former pastor. He was like, just know that the congregation, we support you if you feel you need to address these issues. We want to be able to hear from you on these issues. And that put me at ease, knowing that we can't disconnect from that. We can't disconnect that stuff from what we read in the Bible. And so it was a tough and trying time for many on many points, and maybe we'll get to this later on, but it was also a great opportunity, especially with the pandemic. So hopefully we have an opportunity to unpack that a little bit more. So,
yeah. What about you, Adam?
Yeah, I think as pastors, we had weird funerals. We had weird moments of consoling people. We had weird moments of talking to people through Zoom. I've never talked into more cameras than I've ever, right? Like doing messages, I'm doing Zoom meetings with people that live 3 houses down from me, right? I'm doing all these things that are like, this is just so weird. This is so unique. And I think one of the things that we dealt with over and over and over again was we saw this pandemic split families. It's not just splitting 800-900 people that we have at our church. It's splitting 4 or 5 people that live in the same home. And I'm seeing this split, and I'm seeing these moms and these dads and these children that are just, they're bawling, they're crying, they're broken because one family member thinks it's okay to not wear masks, or one family member sneezing and coughing and they won't go into another room. And it just everything just spiraled. And so I saw mature Christians leave over masking. I saw mature Christians yelling at other people in parking lots because of masking. And so we saw this splintering of the church. And I think what I have never prayed for more discernment in the last couple years than I have. And I wasn't even the senior pastor in 2020, right? Like we had that change happening, and I was more on the backside of the pandemic, and we kind of already made some big decisions there, but still we saw people moving away from others. And it was just this continual splintering. And some people would even talk about how the enemy would be taking little things that were said by the government or by the St. Joseph Medical Board here, or by whatever person was making a decision, they were always splintering away, and there was just chaos that was happening. And so what we have found, and someone else said this to us, it's not my own, so I'm not claiming credit, but I can't remember who said it, but the things that we did in chaos meant a lot more than things done in peacetime. So the calls, the Zoom calls, the showing up and talking to them outside of their window, us dropping off food. One of the things we did here was we divided up our entire church and called every single person in our church to check on them, because we couldn't meet in person. We couldn't do the foyer thing. We couldn't welcome them at the doors. And so we divided up the entire church and I literally sat in my office and just called people for weeks on end. And it was just a big deal. And so those moments, those things that we had, there was a guy that we were really close to that was in the hospital for months because his lungs were just continuing to dissolve in a sense. And thankfully by the Lord's mercy, he's still alive with us, and he's here with us today. And I'm telling you right now, the way he responded in 2019 and the way he responds in 2022, 2023, vastly different.
Mm.
He's been given a new lease on life, and I think there's a lot of people like that as well. So those are some of the things that we've done and some of the things we've seen and experienced and felt. And I still think that we're still coming out of that. I still think there's a lot of trauma, a lot of hurt, a lot of confusion that we're still coming out of that. But I would agree with Theo. The opportunities are endless. The opportunities of speaking hope and clinging to Christ. There, you could tell story after story about that as well.
Yeah, that's good. I remember as you guys were talking, I remember, man, Adam, I remember doing Zoom calls with you instead of meeting for coffee. Theo, I remember having lunch with you in the church parking lot. Just, it was crazy that we did all that stuff. Like, and it's not even that long ago, but it feels like a different world. So I had heard about this research, but I want to look it up for myself. So Barna Research did a survey in March of this year. And they found, now this is just a small sample size, so it doesn't necessarily ring true everywhere, obviously, but they found that 42% of pastors in the last year have seriously considered quitting. And that's interesting in and of itself, but the top 3 reasons I think are even more interesting. First reason is the stress of the job. The second reason is a feeling of loneliness or isolation. And then the third reason is political divisions. So just a general question, how does that resonate with you? How do those findings resonate with you guys? And either one of you can start.
Well, for me, it all resonates. I think the only one that's really telling is the political one, because the first two, I believe at any year you would do that particular survey, because it's a very stressful job. Sometimes it's I don't want to go as far as say it's a thankless job, as if people don't appreciate it, but it's thankless in regards to people appreciate pastors to the extent of what they know a pastor does. But what they don't normally realize is that what they think a pastor does is only a fraction of what a pastor actually does. And so many behind the scenes, because you have it where maybe there's certain things that a member doesn't want the whole congregation to know about, certain things, certain struggles, even if it's a death in the family or a crisis. So it's not just those things that the whole church knows about. It's you're carrying all those burdens. So I think that's part of the stress. That's part of the isolation in terms of not fully feeling like you can share the burden with everyone. It's healthy to share the burden, but because of confidentiality, because of a lot of things, there's a certain extent to how you can share that burden. So part of that call is knowing that you carry that burden, and so that's not shocking. The political stuff isn't shocking either, but I think that's more contextualized to that timing, though. If you took this survey maybe a decade ago, depending upon when it is, that may not have been the third answer. But it just goes to show you how pervasive that stuff has become. Or at least it is, the rhetoric around it is more obvious. Because there's always been church and politics. There's always been politics in church. There's always been those things. But I think the rhetoric and the technology and the fact that the pandemic, what's unique about the pandemic is it had its direct impact, direct effects, sickness, some of those divisions that we talked about, but also had a lot of indirect effects on a lot of what would be seemingly unrelated stuff. So when we talked about the George Floyd, Breonna Taylor, and all those things, that stuff has always been happening, but it just so now it happened during a time when everyone was at home. Everyone was watching the news. Everyone was on social media, and we didn't have the buffers of going to the movies, the buffers of having leisure stuff to numb us, to desensitize, to allow us escape from that reality. Same with that isolation and the political stuff. The pandemic heightened all that stuff. And so I think that's what made it unique. It wasn't just the pandemic itself, but it was the ripple effect of the pandemic in terms of shutting so much stuff down that we use for amusement, that we use for leisure, that we use for buffers.
Yeah.
And I believe that was God's way of saying, you know what, let's strip all this down, including the fact that we couldn't go, quote unquote, to church. And I'm like, no, we still going to church. We just not going to the church building, you know? And so it was a reminder that the stuff we put our stock in, those things are fleeting. And it hopefully helped us refocus our priorities. But I think it did exacerbate a lot of those issues that you brought out in that survey.
Yeah. Yeah. I think the first thing is stress is real. Like some pastors don't believe that it's a thing, or nonprofits don't think it's a thing. And I agree with Theo. There's some people that have no idea what pastors do Monday through Saturday. Really, the joke is, oh, you work on Sundays, it must be great. And you're like, are you kidding me? I was up at 5 this morning. I'm dealing with all sorts of emails coming in and all sorts of stuff you have no idea about, and you should know about, because we're not created sometimes to hold all of those things. And so, yeah, the stress is unknown. I think one of the things that the pandemic did, and also with George Floyd and Breonna Taylor and all of those things that were going on, is it created this unknown, right? It created this unknown. For some people, it's very known, but for people like me and people that are on social media and watching the news, there's all this unknown. What is this? What is going on? Has this always been going on? And some people say, yeah, it's always been going on. And then for some people, it's like, I've never seen this before. I've never experienced this before. And so this unknown becomes very, very scary. One of the things that I tell people all the time is it's always safer to be with the devil you know than the devil you don't know. And that's hard sometimes, because we create these devils in our lives and we're like, I'm okay with that because I know how to control that, manage that, and I know what's going to come at the end of those things. And so with leadership, though, the whole phrase is leadership is lonely, right? That's the thing that people say all the time. Leadership is lonely. Oh, it's when you're at the top, it's just lonely. Well, leadership is lonely if you let it be lonely. There's a lot of things that can still happen. Like Dan was just talking, we've met for years. Dan and I have open-ended conversation. There are things that Dan and I know about each other that we wouldn't tell other people. And it's because we've shared copious amounts of coffee together, which is awesome, right? But loneliness, the leadership and loneliness doesn't have to always go together. I got a small group that I trust. I got a wife that I trust. I got a staff that I trust. And it's about setting some of those cultures. Now, I will say this, though, when you start making decisions, that's when you're going to get rocks thrown at you. That's the things when people are like, well, why'd you make that decision? Why did you do this? I had one of our dear saints, a beautiful, amazing woman who serves over and over and over again in our church. We pulled a program this year, and we're doubling down on another one. And she was really upset. She was like really, really upset. And I told her, I was like, listen, here's why we did it. Here's what we're going to be doing with it. Here's how you can serve in it. And she was like, oh, that makes sense. Okay, I'm going to do that. And I'm like, hold on a second. Whoa, wait, what? And so for me, it was just like, you better know why you're doing what you're doing, because you're right. You make a decision. Not everyone's going to agree with it, but that's okay. As long as you know exactly why you're doing what you're doing. And I feel like sometimes people are just making decisions willy-nilly, and they're like, oh, I think this is what we're going to do. And we're going to chase this. We're going to chase that. We're going to chase this. And it's like, well, your congregation, the people that are following you, are having whiplash at this point. And so talking to your point about politics, I see a lot of politicians talking about uniting people and coming together, and we're going to work together. We're going to accomplish these things. But what I've seen is, man, politicians have divided and destroyed over and over and over again. And I have seen when we actually come under Christ's kingdom, right? The Sermon on the Mount, Matthew 5-7, there's unity that comes from that. And so I think for me, as much as we want to talk about politicians, we want to talk about policies, we want to talk about the government. And Dan, you know, I love politics. Like, I hope we get into it tonight. Let's go. Right. But for me, it's, I see us being more unified under Christ than under a flag. And so, man, as much as that's hard to say, I see that more unity inside of the church underneath Christ than the American flag.
Yeah, that's good. Allie, take it away.
And at least that's how it should be.
Yeah. Amen.
You know, yeah.
Amen.
Right.
That's not always how it is, though.
No, it's not.
I just wanted to pause right here and say thank you. Thank you for joining us and being here with us on the We All Need Each Other podcast. If you want to support us, please don't hesitate to stop by our website, www.transformation58.com/give. Thanks. We all need each other.
So I have a question. As you guys have been saying, you know, it's been lots of different things, whiplash and all these things. As you are making decisions as a leader and having to, like you said, be clear so that people understand why you're making those decisions, have you done your own personal wrestling? Like, has all of these things like brought in your own wrestling that you're like, well, I don't know what I think, like this or this, like masks or unmasks, like I'm trying to, because it's like we were trying to figure it out as it was happening. And so to be a leader of like, I'm confident, like this is the way we need to go. Did you have your own questioning and your own, how am I supposed to lead people when I'm trying to like figure out what should be happening? Like you said, Adam, you're praying for discernment. Like, what did that look like for you guys as you were personally processing things and then having to confidently lead people? And how did you do that? Like the personal along with leading people through it?
Brother Alvin, you can take that one first.
Great question. I think one of the things that I've started doing since I've taken over this job is, even before I get out of bed, God, give me your wisdom, give me your eyes to see, give me patience. Yeah. I think that's one of the things that I've been learning a ton. One of the things that I try to teach our staff and I try to model as well is, I don't ever want to come with just a definitive answer. I want to come with lots of questions. And one of the things inside of the pandemic and inside of the politics and even inside of the racial struggles that we've been seeing in our country, for someone to ask questions has been like, well, why aren't you taking a stand? Take a stand. Yeah. For me, I'm like, I don't know. Right. And I think one of the things people see, especially on Twitter and Facebook and CNN and Fox News, everyone's trying to break a story. Everyone's trying to be first. Yeah. When I see Jesus, I don't see him trying to be first at anything. I think he's trying to relate to people. He's trying to ask questions. I think of the woman at the well, right? And he's like, can I have a drink? He wasn't like, hey, go get your husband. Hey, go do this. Hey, go do that. I know you're doing this. I know you're sitting here. He's welcoming him to a conversation. And he sees that with his disciples. And so for me, I'm trying to welcome people into a conversation rather than saying, this is my definitive point. And if you're not for me, you're against me. Right. And so I think for me, again, praying for discernment, but also becoming a masterful question asker. How do I do this? And then taking what I'm learning and taking what I'm feeling and drawing it all back to scripture and saying, God, what do you say about this? What do you talk about in this? I don't want my words. I want your words. I don't want my will. I want your will, like that type of thing. And it's been hard because I think we run at a pace in America. We run at a pace that should be fast and quick and all these different things. And for the last few years, it's like, whoa, we got to pull these things back and let's talk and let's uncover. And that's hard to do sometimes.
Right. And I love that what you said, like the humility there, because I think a lot of leaders felt like, well, I can't show that I don't know, or I have to have an answer. I have to lead. So I'm just going to stand on something but if we can come in humble of like, okay, I'm just as disoriented as you are, like, this is happening to me, just like it's happening to you.
Yep.
But okay, like, let's move this direction. Like, we still need to have, movement. We can't just all be disoriented together. But I think that was really good. That humility is a big piece.
You go back to the Beatitudes, right? You just go through all those things. Happy are the people that are boom, 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 down the line. And I think for so many of us, we've been like, oh, I'm happy when I make the decision, I lead. And then you're like, oh, that's wrong. Oh, sorry, I gotta pull all that back. So yeah, how can we lead with humility? That's a beautiful thing.
Right. Theo, did you have anything on that? Like, did you feel disoriented and then you're trying to lead other people that are disoriented, or how did that look for you?
I didn't feel disoriented about the pandemic. Like I said, I was, in a not good space in terms of some of the racial unjust that was going on. That had me off track for a little bit. In terms of the pandemic, I thought I heard early on in terms of, at least for our congregation, but I think even for the church in general, that God wanted to use that to bring us back to him. In some ways, it's like we've gotten off track. We lost focus. We made idols out of a lot of stuff. And I think it was just a reminder that the stuff around us is all fleeting, including this church building. I think that was the biggest revelation, that the stuff that we just put so much stock in, God's like, no, you are the church. And we actually utilized that time to really reach out to individuals who were floating around. We used Zoom to do that. Just reaching out to individuals. And Adam said two great things. The humility piece is important, not just during that time, but just as a pastor, especially when we live in a culture where you have sometimes the deification of pastors, the celebrity pastor culture, just staying humble and recognizing the weighted responsibility that it is to be a shepherd, and then taking it all back to the word. We read there's nothing new under the sun. And so God was not taken aback by the pandemic. He was not taken aback by any of that stuff. Although to mask or not to mask may be a new question, what's at the fundamental heart of that question, you can find in the word about other stuff, whether it's to eat this food or to not eat this food, to exercise this ritual, to not exercise this ritual, to be circumcised or uncircumcised. There's always been those debates. And so getting back to the word of God, what does the word of God say about this? That was important. And then challenging the congregation and other brothers and sisters in the faith to operate in love. I was hearing a whole lot about truth, speaking the truth. I gotta speak the truth and keep it real. And or where's your faith? Because if you're wearing this mask, where's your faith? God has not given us a spirit of fear. And I'm like, well, all that is true. I said, and oftentimes when you see faith in the Bible, it is married with faith, hope, and love. And it says the greatest of the three is love. So faith is as important, but faith without love, and I was just seeing faith, quote unquote, being used to practice discrimination in so many different ways. And so I remember I had a running joke at our church in terms of racism and reverse racism. I was like, we're not going to have maskism. We're not going to have reverse maskism. So don't be mad at the person wearing the mask, and don't be mad at the person who's not wearing the mask. We're not going to have maskism or reverse maskism. There's a liberty, there's a freedom. Maybe utilize it to have dialogue about why they do and why they don't. So I think that was an exposure of something greater in the church in terms of how we're just so divided on so many issues. So it was interesting going back to Adam, and maybe you can refresh my memory. I don't want to butcher what you said, since you said you got it from somewhere else, but what you did during the chaos of, can you repeat that part?
Yeah, the things done in chaos go a lot further than things done in peace times.
All right. So when you first said that, and then you broke that down saying the value of those things done. When I first heard you say it, what popped in my mind, which I thought we were going to go, was the things done in chaos speaks sometimes more truly to who we are than the things done in peacetime. You know, Abraham Lincoln, you want to see who the value of a man, the integrity of a man, give him power. So sometimes my wife always asks me why I love watching apocalyptic type movies, end of the world movies. And I said, for two reasons. You're going to have some individuals who were knuckleheads, who were the downtrodden, who were forgotten about, who are going to have the opportunity to step up and do something great. And then you're going to have some individuals who were holier than thou, who are going to find themselves doing something bad they thought they would never do. And so sometimes that chaos sheds light on that which was already there. So I don't think the pandemic and Trump and all this stuff caused believers to lose their minds. I think it just took back some of the veil and took us behind the curtain to see, okay, now we know who we really dealing with. We are, now we know who we really are. And I think that can be a good thing, because then it allows us to focus on authentic community, reconciliation, restoration. Let's deal with it. Now that I know that we're on this, how can we reconcile that stuff versus just having this pseudo community, eggshells, don't ask, don't speak type thing. I thought it exposed a lot of stuff that we probably needed to deal with.
Yeah.
So I have a question that kind of takes us, does a U-turn a little bit, but I know some pastors that would say, with everything going on culturally and all the politics that, were coming up, especially with all the racial tension, some pastors were like, you absolutely from the stage need to talk about it, need to, be talking about it as a church, as a congregation. And then other pastors I knew were like, oh, that's not really the place. Like, don't get into that. It'll just cause more division. Where are you guys at with that? Like, would you say that as churches, we need, how do we engage in some of the culture stuff? Is it good to just, hey, we need to talk about this from the stage and just really be talking about it? Or is it you know what? I just knew a lot of tension around there, and I'm just curious your thoughts on that, because that was something I was really interested in seeing how churches were handling the culture climate, if it was being talked about or if it was kind of being not as much talked about. I'm just curious.
I know for me, surprisingly, I don't know if this should be surprising or not, I talk about it some, but not a whole lot.
Okay.
And that's by design. I always tell people, being at a place like Bethel, I get to talk about race every day in class without ever having to talk about race, being the lone African-American professor. And now I am the first Black pastor at our church. Our church was founded in 1888. So we have an old church. And 3 years after the founding of the denomination, and I'm the first Black pastor.
Wow.
We have had conversations about race in the church's history. We will have conversations about race in the church's history. What I found is, if it was an elephant in the room type situation, I would address it.
Yeah.
So we probably did have some conversations during the pandemic while all that stuff was going on. I'm pretty sure we did. And at the very least, whether the message was about that, I shared what I was personally going through during that time.
That's cool. Yeah.
And I think that might have been even more profound for them to hear, and including the story where I literally blacked out almost on the phone with a dear brother who happens to be white. And we were having a conversation about George Floyd, and it just turned left really quick. And all I remember is screaming at the top of my lungs several curse words, not at him per se. And then my wife I had him on speakerphone. And she just grabbed the phone and says, I'm going to hang up now. And she just hung up, and I sat there and just cried. And then he and I hashed it out a couple of days later. But that's when I knew I was probably, at the tail end of my wits. And so I think it's important. I think it has to be done well, wisely, because I've heard horror stories including from white brothers and sisters who erred on the side of we white people we're just evil type, those types of messages where the white guilt coming from white people. And I've had people say, when I speak, you're not going to beat us up like that person beat us up, are you? And I've been in the game for a while. I know how to have those conversations well.
Yeah.
And there's ways to talk about that stuff while taking a couple steps back and talking about something biblical that addresses that, but also addresses other stuff. Mm-hmm. We often want to address that thing. I prefer to get to the heart of the matters that address that thing as well as other things that are related. Yeah. So people can still get it. And then there's opportunities where if someone says, hey, we wish you would talk more about those things, I've taken liberty to do that. But I think as a Black pastor, and whether this is right or not, I'm not saying this is the right approach, but sometimes it's interesting, and I read this somewhere, maybe it was in the Pedagogy of the Press, the book that Dan said was just too deep. He had to stop reading.
I tried to read that thing. I couldn't do it, man.
But oftentimes those who are oppressed will often cater to the feelings of their oppressor. When we would have every right to come down, sometimes we use honey instead of vinegar. And it doesn't mean we can't speak that truth to power. But once again, all I was hearing was truth, power, truth, faith, no love, no love, no love. And so I've taken a long-term approach on it, building those relationships, establishing sound theology, and then strategically choosing those times, because there have been times, and there will be some times with our church guaranteed, where we have those conversations. Mm-hmm. But that's just been my philosophy. I have no problem with anyone who does or doesn't. It'd be interesting to know the rationale for why they do and why they don't, and if it's being done well. I think that's important.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Yeah, we've done a couple different things. Before I was the senior pastor, I was the associate pastor, and I was in charge of a bunch of different things. And so one of the things that we did during the was that the 2020 election, we did a 8-week series on Jesus and politics. Mm-hmm. So it was great. And it was tough. And so what we didn't do it on Sunday morning. We did it on Monday night. And we invited people to come, and we're going to have this conversation. So myself and another board member of ours who's worked in Washington, D.C., who's a lawyer, who's really integrated into politics, we led a discussion. Dan and Corey actually came and led a discussion on race. And it was great. It was wonderful, wonderful. And so it was one of those really, really cool things. I've done a race circle with Corey and the transformational ministry as well. And then it's interesting too, because I'm also the Mishawaka police chaplain. So I ride with our police. And so I'm integrated on this on all sorts of different levels. And one of the things now as a senior pastor is I try to have conversations that other people are having. I don't want to brush things under the rug, because it's like, well, we just don't care about those things, which we do, because we're talking about them outside of the church. Mm-hmm. And so I think the church sometimes runs in, we're just yelling and we're screaming, and it doesn't really help. And then other times we just avoid, and that doesn't help either. I think that the church needs to walk into those tension areas and bring the gospel, bring peace, bring truth inside of all of those things. And so one of the things that we've done is we've had special moments of prayer in our services. We've had special moments of conversations with people that disagree. It doesn't matter if you're a CNN folk, if you're a Fox folk, or if you're anywhere in between, right? We're trying to have conversations. And one of the things that I've tried to do is I try to pick my moments. I don't try to always hit the large. I try to focus on the small, because I don't want people to misinterpret what I'm saying. I don't want people to misinterpret my intentions. And so I start small. I don't go large. And one of the things that I've tried to do inside of all of these things, especially in the politics class that we've done, and inside of, as we're coming up this week with elections, I try to find those shaping stories from people, and draw those out, because oftentimes people have a story behind why they're saying what they're saying, or the way that they're acting. And I want to know more about that. So when I ride with the police, I'm often talking to the people we're handcuffing and sitting down and talking with them, like, how did we find ourselves here? Right. Or when we're walking into places and there's chaos, how can I find moments to bring peace to those people that are in chaos? Like I feel like Jesus did over and over and over again. And so I try to balance it with, yes, speaking up in a large area, but really trying to listen and hear, and bring peace in those small areas as well. Because I think it's really important for us to lead the way in peace, lead the way in listening, rather than just pounding our fists and being angry. Christians have a really bad reputation of just being angry Christians. And I don't want to continue to help that assumption continue on.
Yeah, that's good, guys. We're getting close to our time, so I think maybe Allie and I'll each ask you one more question. Allie, I've got mine ready, so I'll go first, then I'll let you bring it home. And I apologize because it's going to be a little bit longer setup for this question, but so just being here with you guys tonight and talking with you whenever I see you just reminds me how grateful I am for both of you guys. I said before we started recording, you guys have really kept me hopeful over the last few years. It's not an uncommon story for people, especially in these last few years, to be frustrated with the church, disillusioned, deconstructing, questioning why we do the things we do in church, looking back at our faith tradition and going, I just don't know if I believe this anymore. And I'm one of those people. I've had lots of times over the last 5-6 years of feeling really disillusioned, really unsure of I don't think I've questioned my belief. My faith hasn't wavered, but my feelings about church have been all over the place. And yeah, because we've talked about it. And again, it's not an uncommon story right now.
No.
But you two, there's more people than you, but you guys have been steady sources of hope for me, because I've seen you guys in these tumultuous times not lose hope. You haven't retreated. You've gone deeper into your calling as pastors. You guys were not senior pastors when all this started. And now you're the lead pastors of these congregations. And I've never talked to you guys and got the sense that you were like, man, I just don't know if I can do this. You guys have always leaned on that side of, it's hard, but this is a great opportunity. God put me here. I'm grateful for this opportunity. And you also just keep it so real. Like, you guys are just real people. Pastors, again, can sometimes get that aura of like, oh gosh, he's the pastor. Everything's perfect. But you guys, when I talk to you, you guys are just normal people who struggle with stuff, who get frustrated, who get hurt sometimes, who are confused sometimes. And you're willing to admit that, and you have conversations with people about it. And so I just want to thank you, first of all, for who you are, the hope that you've given me to know, like, there's amazing people leading churches in my community. But then, so my question is, what has kept you guys hopeful over the last 5 or 6 years?
For me, and I've kind of already touched on this, is the fact that I know it's bigger than me.
Hmm.
It's a blessing just to be able to play a role in what God is doing. And the responsibility for the ultimate doing doesn't fall on me. God is going to provide for his church. He's going to preserve his church. He's going to be glorified. So in some ways, my private prayer sometimes is, Lord, help me to not mess things up. Help me not to get in the way of what you're doing.
Yeah.
My shortcomings, my doubts, my lack of my frustrations, all the things that you talked about, we have those things also at times. And then it's in those times that I'm reminded that my hope is in him. Our hope is in Christ, who doesn't change. I was talking to a dear brother today, and he was like, well, oftentimes we judge the church, not that we shouldn't hold the church to a high standard, we should, but the church is not Christ. So there was always this understanding that the church was going to strive to be a certain thing and would sometimes fall short of that because there's only one perfect person, that's Christ. So we're going to fall short, and God says, I'll be there to cover those shortcomings. But we're always reading for those who can persevere, for those who can endure. And he helps us do that. And so it's just like marriage. Marriage is not easy. You've been married for a while. It's not easy. There's times when there's debates and arguments and stuff like that. But hopefully we buckle down during those times and say, let us remember what our commitment is. And that's what it is in ministry. It's a marriage of sorts. And there's a commitment we've made. Not that there'll always be roses with no thorns, but even rich or poor, sickness and health, better or worse, that we're going to stick this thing out. And God not only calls us to do that, but he also equips us to be able to do that.
Yeah, we did a series just a few, maybe a month or two ago. And what we were doing is we were highlighting the people that have gone before us. And then we're talking about the people that are going to come after us. And so what we did was we took these old pictures from the 60s, 70s, and 80s, and we blew them up and we put them all around our church. And so you walked in and you saw some new pictures of us in Ecuador just a few years ago, but you also saw pictures from 1970s as well. And we were talking about, we get to stand on the shoulders of those who have gone before. They've sacrificed, they've broken their backs, they've prayed, they have made meals, they have done all sorts of things for us to be where we're at today. So what are we supposed to do? What's our role right now in the midst of the 2020s that they're going to be looking back and possibly putting up pictures in a few years, right? And saying, look at what they did so that we can stand on their shoulders. And so I think what Theo was saying, I just don't want to mess this thing up, man. Like, I'm a steward. Somehow I got the keys thrown to me and we're driving the bus right now. And it's like, okay, God, you've got to help me in all these things because I can't do it on my own. Oh my goodness. Like, if it's all on me, let's just park the bus and we're all done. We're going to Theo's church now. Right. And so it's one of those things, but I know that God is stirred something in my soul. He's stirring something in my wife's soul. He's stirring something in hundreds of people's of souls here. And it's just phenomenal for us to do that. And so how do I cling to the hope? I think it's the same way Jesus did. You see the stories of change. You see these 12 Bible school dropouts, right? That go and change the world. And yeah, there's one dud in there, but you see like these fishermen and these tax collectors and all these people start changing the world. And then you get to read Acts and you get to see the Holy Spirit start indwelling people and them using their spiritual gifts and going out and being courageous. And so I feel like the church and myself, we're called to just continue to be courageous and continue to start telling the stories of life change. And I think that's what keeps me hopeful. I mean, I could give you a litany of people that we've seen. We've got to baptize. We've seen people come to Christ. We've been overseas helping people. We're seeing people in South Bend and Mishawaka and Elkhart and Edwardsburg take their next step with Christ. And man, I wake up every day and I'm like, God, continue to give us those stories. And we've got to be better at sharing the stories of even the small wins and even the stories of people that are in the middle of the fight. We've got to get better at that because we love those stories at the end, right? Oh, after 5 years, my marriage, we made it. Well, what about what about year 3 when it was a struggle, when you're like, I want to leave, but I'm not, right? Or my kids are wandering, but yet I'm still praying for them and I'm still loving them, right? Or my job sucks, but I know I've been called here. I need those stories. I need the stories that just suck, right? But yet God's in the middle there. He's meeting people and he's doing some amazing things. And that's what gives me hope. And I love it.
Well, that hope is contagious. I feel that hope. And I think that I hope any pastor that's listening can like feel encouraged by that and be like, okay, like there is hope. Sometimes we focus so much on the hard things that it's like, no, like there is opportunity. I love how you guys both said that. There's so much opportunity right now. So last question to tie it all together. In honor of Aaron, he is our third host that is not here today. He always loves to ask this question at the end of every podcast. And I don't think it was given to you beforehand. So this is just going to be like, what's the first thing that comes to your mind? It's the question, what's something that fascinates you? Like currently, what is something that is fascinating to you? It can be the smallest little thing that's just like silly, or it can be like something really deep that you're like, this is just fascinating me. And it's just kind of a current thing. Like lately, in the last month, in the last whatever, this whole thing is really fascinating to me. I love hearing all the different variety of answers. So whoever wants to take that first, what's fascinating you?
Theo, it looks like you're thinking. I got an answer. I'm good. I got this. I'm a weird dude. Okay, so what fascinates me right now is there's these YouTube like stories that are going on right now of how football teams are fed. I know that's weird.
That would be interesting to me.
I'm telling you right now, millions of dollars are getting poured into these facilities to feed football players and other athletes. And I am fascinated by it because like, I am a short man. I'm so glad that we're seated right now because we all look the same. I am a short king. Okay. I get that. I'm understanding that. I'm an athlete. I played college sports. And I understand what fuels my body is so important. Again, as a pastor, what fuels your soul is so important. I'm just fascinated by these Arkansas. I watched one today. I'm not ashamed to admit I watched one today about West Virginia and the nutritionists of what they're trying to get these 17, 18, 19-year-olds to eat. They're teaching them how to shop at the grocery store. So they're not buying honey buns, but they're buying like actual protein. And it's amazing. It just fascinates me because it's like what we put in our bodies and who we surround ourselves with and the systems we put in place in our lives absolutely matter so that we can reach the goals that either our coaches put, our families put out in front of us, you put in front of you. It's all how you feed yourself. So again, I know I tied that back spiritually, but I'm fascinated by it. I don't care who knows about it. It's fantastic. The thing is called Sports Dissected. It's awesome. Go watch it.
I'm going to tell my husband about that because he always brings me. He just shared a coach sharing something. He just shared it at dinner tonight. He's like, you guys got to see this. So my kids and everyone were watching this. So he will be fascinated by that.
They do all sorts of colleges. It's fantastic. Corey, you'll love it. Yes. Also, Aaron, great question.
All right, yes. Theo, do you have anything that's fascinating you recently?
Honestly, nothing that I can say, I find this really fascinating. One thing that has piqued my interest that I'm looking forward to, Black Panther 2 Wakanda Forever.
Okay.
And so there is something fascinating about that in terms of this conversation about Marvel's decision to not recast T'Challa, King T'Challa. And at one point in time, my stance would have been, oh yeah, I agree with that decision because it would be too tough to see someone else up there outside of Chadwick Boseman. And this is what a lot of his cast members said. But then there was an interesting article I read, and I haven't fact checked it, but I know it claimed it had an interview with, I think, maybe one of his brothers, Chadwick's brothers, and just other fans and other Marvel historians who spoke about not just because there's going to be a new Black Panther in the movie. You know, looks like it's going to be Shuri, which is good that they're continuing the Black Panther. But it was noted that as important as the Black Panther is as a character to Black people, to see this role, the character of King T'Challa is probably more important, the person behind the mask. And the decision to not recast it means that there no longer be a representation of the king. We'll still see the hero Black Panther, but we won't see this Black king. And they were saying that people, including family members, were saying that that's important. In Marvel's history, T'Challa is very important. He meant a lot to open up that to Black people to see this representation is very important. And now that character is being killed off, although the Black Panther character will remain, the king has been killed off. And once I read that, it has changed my view that yes, although it would be difficult to see someone up there, but what's more important, honoring Chadwick Boseman, who was very great, should be honored, or this legacy that is now going to be not represented on the screen in terms of Black royalty, not a Black superhero, because King T'Challa is not a superhero, Black Panther is, but a Black person that we could touch, so to speak, versus the superhero part. And so I think that's fascinating, having those conversations that how do you honor and say something that makes a lot of sense, but then someone else can say something that also makes a lot of sense too.
Right.
So I think that's fascinating.
And I think it's one of those things, if Chadwick was here, I feel like he would want that legacy to be honored over himself. Like he would want, so that's tricky. Yeah. Yeah.
So it's gonna be interesting if down the road, if they do TV magic and say, haha, guess what? T'Challa's back, you know. I think there will be not backlash, but I think that that's a sentiment that people will begin to see. That as important as Black Panther is, that's someone behind a suit that we can't see. The person that we could see is no longer going to be represented.
That is
what year did the original Black Panther come out? Do you remember?
It seems like it was before the pandemic, so it's got to be 16 or 17. It's been a while. I'm thinking 16.
I was gonna say at least one good thing happened in the last 6 years or so.
and I'm hearing, you know, that this is better.
I hope
you know that this is going to be a great movie, Oscar worthy, and so you know I'm super stoked about that. You know, it's important.
That's cool. That's good. Guys, this has been amazing. I appreciate you guys so much. You're great friends. You're doing a great job in your roles as pastors at your churches, making our community better. And I just appreciate you guys. Appreciate the time you gave us tonight. So thank you.
Thank you for the invite. Really appreciate it.
Thank you.